Welcome back, everyone. I want to talk today about what's happening with Iran. And I want to talk about it in a way that you won't hear on the news, because the news gives you the surface. Troop movements, carrier strike groups, diplomatic timelines, and that's fine. That's necessary. But it doesn't tell you why this story grips you the way it does. It doesn't explain the feeling in your gut when you read the headlines, and that feeling matters because it's ancient. It's older than aircraft carriers and ballistic missiles. It's older than America and older than Iran. So let's go deeper. Here's what's happening on the surface, and then we'll get underneath it. The United States has 2 carrier strike groups positioned in the Middle East. President Trump has given Iran what amounts to a final window, 10 days, maybe 2 weeks, to reach a deal on its nuclear program or face military strikes. His generals, particularly General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, are cautioning him. They're saying, we have munitions shortfalls, our regional allies aren't fully on board, and any strike, even a so-called limited one, could spiral into a prolonged conflict with Iranian retaliation across the entire region. Missile strikes on American bases, attacks on shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, proxy warfare in Iraq, in Yemen, in Lebanon. The generals are saying this is not Venezuela. This is not a swift extraction. This could be a war. Meanwhile, inside Iran, the regime is fracturing. Massive protests erupted in late 2025 and were brutally suppressed. Thousands killed, thousands detained, women unveiling in the streets, crowds chanting for the fall of the regime. The theocracy is weaker than it has ever been. Its nuclear sites already damaged by strikes last June, its economy in ruins, its proxy network in Hezbollah and Syria devastated. And yet, it is still armed. It still has missiles. And it is still, by all accounts, willing to fight. That's the surface. Now let's talk about what this actually is. There's a story in the book of Daniel, chapter 5, that I think about constantly when I watch situations like this unfold. It's the story of Belshazzar's feast. Belshazzar is the king of Babylon. His grandfather Nebuchadnezzar had built the empire into the most powerful force the world had ever seen, conquered nations, destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, dragged entire populations into exile. And Nebuchadnezzar learned something the hard way. He learned that his power was not his own. God humbled him, drove him mad for 7 years, made him live like an animal in the fields until he acknowledged that sovereignty belongs to something higher than any king. But Belshazzar didn't learn that lesson. He inherited the empire, and he thought the empire was his to play with, so he throws a feast, a grand, decadent celebration. And in a gesture of breathtaking arrogance, he orders his servants to bring out the sacred vessels, the gold and silver cups that Nebuchadnezzar had looted from the temple in Jerusalem, and he drinks wine from them. He takes what is sacred and he uses it as a party trick. He profanes it, and that's when the hand appears on the wall. A disembodied hand writing words that no one in the court can read. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. The king's face goes pale, his knees knocked together. The text is very specific about the physical terror. It says his limbs gave way and his knees knocked against each other. That's what genuine dread looks like. That's the body recognizing something the conscious mind hasn't caught up to yet. Daniel is summoned, and Daniel, who has no loyalty to this king, who owes him nothing, reads the writing. God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. You have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. That night, Belshazzar is killed. Babylon falls. And who takes over? The Persians, Iran. Now, I'm not making a prophecy here. That's not the point. The point is the psychological structure of the story because it maps onto what we're watching right now with eerie precision. What does Belshazzar represent? He represents the leader who inherits power without understanding its weight, who treats serious things frivolously, who ignores the counsel of those who see clearly, like Daniel, like the wise men he initially calls and dismisses, and who believes that because the empire still stands, it will always stand. He confuses the appearance of strength with actual strength. And here's the thing that's terrifying about the Belshazzar archetype, and you can apply this to multiple actors in the current crisis, not just one. The Belshazzar figure doesn't see the hand on the wall until it's already writing. The signs are there. The empire is hollow. The feast is loud precisely because the foundation is cracking, but the music drowns out the sound of the fracture. Now, think about Iran's supreme leader. Khamenei is 86 years old. He's ruled for 37 years. His nuclear program has been bombed. His strongest proxy, Hezbollah, has been devastated. His people are in the streets demanding his removal. The economy is collapsing. And yet, the regime insists, publicly, loudly, that it is ready for war, that it will respond decisively and proportionately, that all American bases in the region are legitimate targets. That's the feast. That's Belshazzar drinking from the sacred vessels. It's a display of defiance that masks profound vulnerability. And anyone paying attention can see the hand on the wall. The question is whether the regime can read it. But here's where it gets more complicated, because the Belshazzar story isn't just about the fall of a tyrant. It's about what replaces him. The Persians, Cyrus the Great specifically, are portrayed in Scripture as instruments of divine purpose. Isaiah 45 calls Cyrus God's anointed, his Messiah, and that's remarkable because Cyrus wasn't Jewish, he wasn't a believer, he was a pagan king, and yet God uses him to liberate the Jewish captives, to allow the rebuilding of the temple, to restore what Babylon had destroyed. The biblical writers are making a profound point here. They're saying that the force that overthrows tyranny is not always what you expect. It doesn't come wearing the right uniform, or speaking the right language, or praying to the right God. It comes from wherever it comes from, and it serves a purpose larger than itself. So when we watch Iranian protesters in the streets, when women removing their hijabs, crowds chanting against the regime, knowing full well they could be shot, we're watching something that has that quality of the unexpected instrument. People who have been crushed under theocratic rule for nearly half a century, rising up not with armies, but with their bodies, their voices, their willingness to suffer. And the question, the moral question, the strategic question, the deeply biblical question is this: what is the right relationship between external power and internal liberation? Because Cyrus didn't liberate the Jews by accident. He wasn't an oblivious bystander, he acted deliberately. But he also didn't liberate them by destroying everything in his path. He conquered Babylon, yes, but the historical accounts suggest he did it with remarkable restraint. He entered the city without a prolonged siege. He didn't burn it. He didn't massacre the population. He presented himself as a liberator, not a destroyer. And that's the crux of the dilemma facing the United States right now. There is a genuine moral case for action. The Iranian regime has killed thousands of its own people. It's a theocratic dictatorship that oppresses women, executes dissidents, and funds proxy wars across the Middle East. The protesters are begging for help. Trump told them help is on its way. That creates an obligation, not just a political one, but a moral one. But the generals are saying something important, and it maps directly onto biblical wisdom. Proverbs 20 verse 18 says, Plans are established by counsel, by wise guidance wage war, and Proverbs 25 verse 8. Do not go hastily to court, for what will you do in the end when your neighbor puts you to shame? The counsel here is, don't confuse the desire for a dramatic victory with the reality of what war actually entails. A limited strike might feel decisive. It might look good on television, but the Iranian regime, cornered, humiliated, facing what it perceives as existential threat, is unlikely to absorb the blow and negotiate. It's far more likely to retaliate with everything it has. And then what? Then you're in the flood. Then chaos has been unleashed and you can't put it back in the box. This is the core insight of the Noah story, by the way, and it's relevant here. The flood in Genesis isn't just a natural disaster, it's the consequence of a world that has lost its moral compass. Violence fills the earth, and the response to that violence isn't surgical or contained, it's total. Everything is swept away, and God himself, the text says this explicitly, God regrets that he made human beings. That's how catastrophic the descent into chaos can be. Even the Creator mourns. The lesson isn't never act. The lesson is understand that once you open the door to large-scale violence, you don't control what comes through it. You might intend a limited strike, but the flood doesn't care about your intentions. There's one more biblical figure I want to bring into this, and it's Esther. Esther is a Jewish woman who becomes Queen of Persia, of Iran. She's an insider in the empire, and when Haman, the court official, devises a plan to exterminate all the Jews in the kingdom, Esther faces a choice. She can stay silent, protect her position, hope someone else deals with it, or she can speak up at enormous personal risk and try to change the course of events from within. Her uncle Mordecai tells her something unforgettable. He says, "Who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" That line haunts me. For such a time as this. It suggests that there are moments in history where the right action by the right person at the right time can avert catastrophe, not through overwhelming force, but through courage, wisdom, and timing. The Iranian protesters, they're living that. Every woman who removes her hijab in public, every student who chants in the face of armed soldiers, every family that mourns a child killed by the regime and then shows up at the 40-day memorial to mourn publicly, defiantly, they are Esther. They are risking everything because they believe they exist for such a time as this. And the question for external powers, for the United States, for Israel, for the international community, is whether they can support that courage without crushing it under the weight of military escalation. Because here's what could go terribly wrong. A massive U.S. strike hits Iran. The regime, instead of collapsing, rallies nationalist sentiment. The protesters, who were chanting against the regime, are suddenly forced to choose between their oppressors and a foreign invader. The liberation movement dies not because it failed, but because external force gave the tyrant exactly the enemy he needed to justify his tyranny. That's happened before. It happened in Iraq. It is one of the oldest patterns in the book. So, what's the path forward? I don't think it's inaction. Inaction in the face of a regime killing thousands of its own people is its own form of moral failure. But the biblical pattern, if we're serious about learning from it, suggests something more nuanced than strike or don't strike. It suggests, be like Cyrus, not like Belshazzar. Act with purpose, not with vanity. Liberate, don't just destroy. And above all, listen to the counsel of those who understand the cost. It suggests support the Esthers, the ones inside the empire who are already doing the dangerous work of confronting tyranny from within. Amplify their voices, protect them where you can, give them tools and resources and diplomatic cover. Don't drown their revolution in your bombs. And it suggests read the writing on the wall. Empires fall, regimes crumble. The question is never whether tyranny will end. It always does. The question is how much unnecessary suffering accompanies the transition. And that depends on wisdom. I'll leave you with this. The word that Daniel reads on the wall, tekel, means weighed. You have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. That's the most terrifying verdict in all of Scripture because it implies that there is a standard, that actions have weight, that decisions made by leaders, whether in ancient Babylon or modern Washington or Tehran, are being measured against something real. Something that doesn't care about your approval ratings or your military budget or your ideological certainty. Every leader involved in this crisis is being weighed right now. And so, frankly, are the rest of us, because how we respond to the suffering of others, how we think about the use of power, whether we demand wisdom from our leaders or cheer for spectacle, that matters. That goes on the scale too. So pay attention, think carefully, speak truthfully, and pray, if you're the praying type, for the kind of wisdom that prevents floods rather than unleashing them. Thanks for watching. If this resonated with you, subscribe, share it with someone who's thinking about these things. Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read them. Until next time, take responsibility and God bless. Cyrus